She didn't speak, just slid the napkin across the table. 4 letters written in black ink. Most people would have missed them. But the man at table 12 didn't miss much. He saw fear in her trembling hand before he saw the word itself. Help. And by the time she turned away, he'd already made a call no one would trace. The restaurant's rhythm was mechanical. Silverware against porcelain, the hum of conversation, soft jazz spilling from hidden speakers. Every sound felt practiced, choreographed, perfect cover for someone who needed to disappear in plain sight. Clara Wells didn't belong here. Not really. She moved like someone pretending to be calm, like every step took effort to appear normal. Her uniform, white shirt, black vest, hair tied tight, hid the shaking underneath. She'd been careful all day, careful about what she said, careful about who might be watching, but careful had limits. At the corner of the room, table 12 sat slightly apart from the rest, like it wanted privacy, not company. The man there hadn't spoken since he arrived. No phone, no wine, just a quiet meal and a sharper gaze than anyone else in the room. Gabriel Moretti. Some said he ran half the city. Others said the city ran for him. When Clara reached his table, her reflection caught in the polished silver. Tired eyes, makeup hiding a fading bruise near her jaw. She forced her voice steady. "Would you like me to refill your glass, sir?" He didn't look up right away. When he did, his gaze flicked from the bottle to her wrist, where the faint outline of a handprint peeked from under her sleeve. He nodded once. "That'll be fine." His tone was even, but his eyes weren't. She poured, careful not to spill, then reached for the checkbook. The pen in her pocket suddenly felt heavier than anything she'd ever carried. Her manager was watching again, from behind the counter pretending to polish a glass. He'd been watching her all week. Her hand trembled. She set the napkin down next to the bill and wrote 4 small letters in black ink. Help. Not a plea. A test. To see if anyone in this place saw her as human. She straightened, forced a polite smile, and walked away. The napkin stayed behind like a landmine. Gabriel watched it for a long moment, his fork motionless. He could have ignored it. Most men in his position would have. But he noticed details for a living. He noticed fear the way others noticed perfume. He reached forward, pressed a fingertip to the black letters, and smudged the ink slightly, claiming it, testing its truth. The manager started moving toward Clara. Gabriel stood. Conversation died instantly. Even the music seemed to pause. "Your waitress," he said calmly to the manager. "Looks like she's about to faint. Let her breathe." The man blinked, confused by how polite the threat sounded. Yes, sir." When Clara looked back moments later, table 12 was empty. The napkin was gone, and in its place sat a black business card, metallic writing catching the light. "You're safe until I say otherwise." The night shift ended later than usual. Rain had stopped, but the air still shimmered with that smell, wet asphalt and perfume. Clara stepped out the back door, clutching her bag like it might keep her upright. Her manager's car idled by the dumpster, headlights off. She didn't look at him. She just kept walking toward the main road, heels tapping against cracked pavement. When she reached the corner, a sedan rolled past and stopped a few yards ahead. Tinted windows, engine humming. Her pulse jumped. Then the rear door opened. "Get in," a calm voice said. She froze. Gabriel Moretti sat inside, the same gray suit, the same unreadable stare. Clara looked around, the street empty, neon signs flickering above her. "I'm not going anywhere with you," she said quietly. "You already did," he replied. "When you wrote that word." She hesitated only a second before sliding in. The door shut with a heavy click, sealing them into the hum of the engine and the faint smell of cigar smoke. Inside, he didn't speak right away. City lights slid across his face like passing thoughts. Finally, he said, "You work at Maison Verde. You live on 12th and Murray, and you've been looking over your shoulder since Monday." Her breath caught. "How do you know that?" "I notice things," he said. "You should start doing the same." She turned toward him. "I didn't ask for your help." He met her eyes. "Then why did you write it?" Clara looked down at her hands, knuckles white around her bag strap. "Because he said no one would believe me." "Who?" "My husband." The words fell like broken glass between them. Gabriel didn't move, just reached into his coat, pulled out the napkin, creased, the black ink smeared where his finger had pressed it. "Then he was wrong," he said. "Someone believed you." They drove in silence for a while, through narrow streets where rainwater mirrored every streetlight. Finally, she asked, "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." "I don't need to know you," he said. "I just need to know who hurt you." His phone buzzed once. He glanced at the screen, expression tightening, then slid it back into his pocket. "Your husband," he said slowly, "has friends in uniform. That's why you couldn't run to the police." She nodded. "He said he'd find me anywhere." Gabriel leaned back, thoughtful. "Then let's make anywhere a little harder to reach." The car turned down a narrow lane lined with tall iron fences. At the end stood an old townhouse, windows dark except for one soft light on the upper floor. He opened the door. "Stay here tonight. No one will follow you past my gate." Clara stepped out, hesitating at the stairs. She looked back once. "You don't strike me as the merciful type," she said. "I'm not," he replied. "I'm the cautious type, and cautious men don't like loose ends." He paused, eyes narrowing slightly. "You're not a loose end, yet." The townhouse didn't look like much from the outside. Gray brick, shuttered windows, a gate that creaked when it closed. But inside, everything was precise. Controlled. Every object in its place, like even the furniture feared being touched without permission. Clara stood just inside the doorway, dripping rainwater onto marble. A fire burned in the next room, steady and quiet. "Upstairs," Gabriel said. "Third door on the right." She hesitated. "You're not afraid I'll run?" He glanced over his shoulder. "If you could have run, you wouldn't have written that napkin." She followed the sound of her own footsteps up the staircase. The walls were lined with oil paintings. No faces, just landscapes, muted colors, stormlight trapped in frames. The guest room was simple. Clean sheets, folded towel, a glass of water on the nightstand. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her hands until they stopped shaking. The silence pressed against her ears until even her heartbeat felt too loud. From below, she could hear muffled voices, Gabriel's low, controlled tone and another man's rougher one. "She's not lying," Gabriel said. "How can you be sure?" "Because liars look at your face when they talk." She didn't. A pause, then the sound of a drawer sliding open. Metal clinked. "Make sure no one followed her," Gabriel said, "and pull her husband's file." The door shut. Clara stood and crossed to the window. A courtyard stretched behind the townhouse, black cars parked beneath iron lamps. One of the guards glanced up at her silhouette, then turned away like he'd been trained not to notice. Her reflection in the glass looked nothing like the woman who'd served wine hours ago. The makeup had washed away. The bruise didn't look smaller under the soft lamplight. It looked honest. She didn't cry. She couldn't. Crying meant weakness, and weakness was what he liked most. Her phone buzzed once. Unknown number. "You really think he can hide you from me?" The message made her throat tighten. Before she could type back, the phone was gently taken from her hand. Gabriel stood behind her, sleeves rolled, his expression unreadable. "You don't answer threats," he said quietly. "You erase them." He dropped the phone into a small steel box on the desk, pressed a button. A faint hiss, a spark, and the phone went dark, smoke curling from its seams. She stepped back. "That was my only contact." He met her eyes. Now it's his last breadcrumb. She sank back onto the bed, unsure whether to thank him or scream. "Why are you helping me?" she asked finally. Gabriel studied her for a moment. "You remind me of someone who thought fear could be reasoned with." She was wrong. He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "Get some sleep. In the morning, we start fixing your problem." "What problem?" He looked over his shoulder. "The kind of men who think a woman asking for help isn't their concern." The door clicked shut behind him, leaving her in a room that was safe, but only because it belonged to a man more dangerous than the one she'd escaped. Morning came gray and heavy. The storm had stopped, but the sky still looked bruised, same as the skin beneath Clara's eye. She hadn't slept. Every sound from the hallway, every footstep, had pulled her awake again. When she finally stepped downstairs, she found Gabriel in the study. The curtains were drawn, the fire dead. A file lay open across the desk, photographs, printouts, phone records, all spread like evidence in a trial no one would ever see. He didn't look up right away. "You lied," he said quietly. Her breath caught. "About what?" "Your husband. He's not just a cop." He pushed the file toward her. "He runs collection for the Rossi family, undercover. That bruise wasn't from jealousy. It was from a deal gone wrong." Clara's throat went dry. "You think I'm part of that?" He finally looked at her. "I think you were the warning." The door opened behind them. Rico entered. Same dark suit, hands stained faintly with grease or something darker. "It's done," he said. Gabriel nodded. "Show her." They crossed into another room, cold, windowless, and humming with low fluorescent light. A man sat tied to a chair, hands bound, mouth gagged, one eye swollen shut. His shirt was once white. Clara froze. "Who is he?" "Your husband's driver," Gabriel said. "He followed you from the restaurant." Rico lifted the man's chin, revealing a fresh bruise and the faint outline of a badge tattoo near his collarbone. "Undercover unit. Real one, this time. Which means someone high up gave him clearance." Gabriel crouched beside the chair, calm as ever. "Tell me who else knows where she is." The man mumbled through the gag. Gabriel removed it. "Go to hell," the man spat. Gabriel stood, brushing his hands off. "You first." He nodded once toward Rico, who tightened his grip on the chair and whispered something Clara couldn't hear. There was no screaming, no theatrics, just silence thick enough to make her stomach turn. Moments later, Rico spoke. He said 2 names, a lieutenant and a detective. Both paid by Rossi. Both have your husband's address in their phone logs. Gabriel turned to her. "You still think writing that napkin was a mistake?" Clara shook her head slowly. Her voice came out thin. "You can't just hurt people like this." He met her gaze. "You think the law's going to save you? The same law that let him hit you until you stopped calling it violence?" Her chest tightened. "That's not justice." "No," he said, softly. "It's balance." Rico dragged the man out, footsteps fading. Gabriel poured 2 glasses of water and handed her one. "Drink. You look like you're about to faint." She didn't move. "How far are you willing to go?" He smiled faintly. "Depends on how many people deserve it." She stared at him. The calm, the control, the logic that made sense only in his world. And somewhere deep down, a truth began to form. The man she feared might have saved her life, but the man who saved her might destroy everything else she believed in. That night, she stood by the window again. The city lights looked different now, smaller. Somewhere out there, 2 names Gabriel mentioned were already being erased quietly. She whispered to herself, "What happens when the balance runs out?" Behind her, Gabriel's voice answered, low and certain. "Then we start over." The night after the interrogation, the air around the townhouse felt different. Heavier, like the city was holding its breath. Gabriel's men rotated in shifts, headlights cutting through the fog outside. No one spoke above a whisper. The silence wasn't peace, it was preparation. Clara watched from the second-floor window as one of the guards smoked under a flickering lamp. "Does it ever stop?" she asked quietly. Gabriel stood behind her, coat draped over his arm. "No," he said. "You just get better at surviving it." He handed her a small envelope. Inside were 2 passports, each with new names. "Why 2?" she asked. "One for when you think you're safe. One for when you realize you're not." She looked up at him, voice trembling. "You think they'll come here?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. By midnight, the first warning came. Rico burst into the study, phone in hand. They hit the west gate. 2 men down. Gabriel's jaw tightened. How many? 3 cars, unmarked. Clara felt her heartbeat thunder in her ears. "My husband?" "Maybe," Rico said. "But someone's paying his bills, and they're not short on ammunition." Gabriel reached for the drawer beneath his desk. The sound of the pistol's slide racking back was as calm as his voice. "Lock the doors," he said, "and get her below." Rico nodded, motioning to Clara. "Let's go." She hesitated. "What about you?" Gabriel's eyes lifted. "I'll be right behind you." But when she turned to follow, he was already dialing a number. Downstairs in a reinforced hallway lit by one trembling bulb, Clara's hands shook as Rico keyed in a code on the metal door. "You really trust him?" she asked. Rico glanced at her. "Trust? No. But I've seen what happens to the people who cross him." The door opened into a concrete room lined with shelves, spare generators, crates of files, maps of the city with circles drawn in red. Then the explosion came. Not close, but close enough for the floor to tremble. Clara stumbled. "What was that?" Rico listened, eyes narrowing. "Back wall. They breached the alley." He raised his radio, but the static screamed before dying entirely. Another blast. This one closer. Clara pressed herself against the wall. "They're going to kill him." Rico checked his watch. "Then they better hurry." Upstairs, the fight was fast and surgical. 3 men burst through the dining hall, guns drawn. But Gabriel moved like someone who'd already rehearsed every step. A crash of glass. A flash of muzzle fire. When the smoke cleared, only 1 man was still breathing. Gabriel knelt beside him. "Your boss should have known better." The man spat blood. "He'll burn you for this." Gabriel smiled thinly. "Then he'd better start with himself." He fired once. By dawn, the house stood in ruins. Smoke curling from shattered windows, guards scattered across the courtyard. Rico emerged with Clara, guiding her through debris. She saw Gabriel standing near the gate, shirt streaked with soot, blood glinting faintly at his collar. She whispered, "You could have left me." He looked at her for a long moment. "I could have. But then I'd owe myself a reason." Behind them, sirens began to echo through the hills. Not police, cleanup crews, his men. "Where do we go now?" she asked. He stepped forward, slipping the unmarked passport into her hand. "Anywhere," he said, "as long as you never write that word again." The city was still asleep when Gabriel stepped out into the cold. Smoke rose from the wreckage of the townhouse behind him, a black silhouette against the fading stars. Sirens echoed in the distance, faint and meaningless. Clara followed slowly, her borrowed coat pulled tight, hair tangled from the night's chaos. She didn't ask if it was over. The blood on his cuff answered that for her. They stopped at the courtyard gate. The sun had barely touched the skyline, but its first light glinted off the wet cobblestones, turning every puddle into gold. "Where will you go now?" she asked. Gabriel looked at her, eyes dark under the glow. "Doesn't matter. They'll come again. They always do." "You don't have to keep fighting," she whispered. He almost smiled. "You said the same thing last night when I pulled you off the floor. The problem is, fighting is the only thing I'm good at." They walked toward the waiting car. Two guards held the door, their suits torn, faces blank with exhaustion. As Clara stepped in, she glanced at the mansion one last time. The smoke curled upward like a ghost, everything that happened there already being erased, as if it were never meant to exist. Inside the car, the silence stretched. The city outside began to wake, markets opening, streetlights dimming. The world kept moving, blind to what had been cleaned up before dawn. Gabriel leaned back, his hand resting on the edge of his coat. She saw it then, the folded napkin. The same one she had written on. The word "help" still visible, faint, blurred at the corners. "You kept it?" she asked softly. He didn't look at her. "People keep trophies. I keep reminders." "What does it remind you of?" "That sometimes the people who need saving are the ones I should have walked away from." The answer hit her harder than she expected. The car stopped near the harbor where the fog rolled in thick and white. Gabriel opened the door and stepped out. She followed, the sea breeze cutting through her breath. "This is where you disappear," he said. "There's a boat waiting. New names, new papers. It'll take you as far as you need to go." Clara stared at him. "And you?" He met her eyes, calm, steady, unreadable. "I'll make sure no one else follows you." "By killing them?" she said. He didn't answer. The silence was enough. She stepped closer, her voice breaking. "You don't have to fix this with blood." He reached out, brushing a stray tear from her cheek. "That's the only language men like him understand." She caught his hand. "Then what about you?" For the first time, his expression cracked. Something fragile breaking beneath all that control. "I stopped being a man like them the night you knocked on my door." The sound of waves filled the pause between them. When she turned to step onto the boat, she didn't look back. She couldn't, because if she did, she wasn't sure she'd leave. Gabriel watched until the boat disappeared into the fog. Then he unfolded the napkin again. The ink had bled, forming shapes that almost erased the letters, except for one line of black where his thumb had pressed too hard. He took a lighter from his pocket and held the napkin over the flame. "Who did this to you?" he whispered to the wind. Then he dropped the burning paper into the sea. The water hissed, and the smoke vanished with the dawn.